You're watching BBC News. I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy. Novak Djokovic wins his court battle after being refused entry to Australia, but he could still have his visa cancelled. His supporters gather in Melbourne. We'll ask how likely it is they'll get to see him defend his Australian Open title. His family is expected to hold a news conference in the coming minutes. We'll bring you what they have to say live. Also ahead, Burma's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi is jailed for another 4 years as the military tries to strengthen its grip following last year's coup. New York is in shock after 19 people, including 9 children, are killed in an apartment block fire in the Bronx. That's all coming up here on Impact. Welcome to the programme. Novak Djokovic has won his court battle to stay in Australia and defend his Grand Slam title. But ministers have threatened that they might exercise powers to cancel his visa anyway. We are expecting his family to give a press conference from Belgrade shortly, with the world #1 joining via video link. We're just going to come out of that news conference with the Djokovic family. Djokovic, his father, his mother, his brother, his uncle, all speaking there, talking about his wish to have freedom of thinking, speech and thought. His mother claiming that he'd been tortured, suffered torture, the way that he'd been treated and harassment. They were all very thankful to the judge, to the Serbian political leadership for helping Djokovic to get to this point where he has been released, and he has apparently played a game of tennis. He's been training, and they were all saying that he'd basically gone there to try and win this next tournament, the Australian Open. It is still not clear, of course, whether the Australian government are going to exercise their right, as they say they have, to still cancel his visa and force him to leave the country. I'm joined now by Shane McGuinness, a sports journalist who's based in Melbourne. Thanks for joining us. I hope you were able to see that news conference just now that's still going on. What's your reaction to what the family is saying? Shane McGuinness, we'll just leave it there for now. Thank you very much for joining us. This is BBC News. Thanks for joining us. You're watching BBC News. I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy. We bring you special coverage of the Djokovic saga that is still unfolding, and the Australian government is considering whether to deport Novak Djokovic despite losing a court case that ruled the tennis star could stay in the country. It's not clear when a final decision will be made. Earlier, a judge ruled that Djokovic could remain in Australia and play in the Open because border officials had treated him unfairly when he arrived in Melbourne. And in the last few minutes, we heard from his family in a press conference in Belgrade. This was his brother.
It's very difficult to defend Novak and not to offend anyone at the same time. We are fighters for justice and rule of law, and we have done everything we could to follow all the procedures.
Well, whilst we heard from his family, Djokovic himself, who we thought was going to join that news conference, but he didn't, and certainly hasn't as yet anyway, but he has taken to Twitter for the first time since announcing that he was on his way to Australia last week. And he says, "I'm pleased and grateful that the judge overturned my visa cancellation. Despite all that has happened, I want to stay and try to compete in the Australian Open. I remain focused on that. I flew here to play at one of the most important events we have in front of the amazing fans. For now, I cannot say more, but thank you all for standing with me through all this and encouraging me to stay strong." Well, just let me show you the news conference, which is still going on in Belgrade. The Djokovic family, his mother, father, uncle and brother, has been going on in Belgrade. And he was, as I said, due to be joining that. At the moment, we haven't seen him. I think there are some photographs, possibly, that Djokovic has posted himself of him
we've been following
standing on the court. Let's listen in a bit more to this news conference.
And it's been a journey.
Well, as that news conference by the Djokovic family continues with his mother, father and brother in shot there, you can see. Let's speak to our correspondent Guy Delorney, who's in the Serbian capital, Belgrade, also. And what do you make of what we've heard from the family? Obviously very defiant, talking about freedom of choice, freedom of expression, and thankful to the judge for his decision. Guy Delorney in Belgrade, thank you very much indeed. That press conference has now wrapped up. We will see what else emerges from Australia. Thank you very much. Let's move on. And American and Russian officials are holding talks in Geneva at the start of a crucial week of diplomacy that could shape the future of Ukraine and the security of Europe. Western allies want to stop Russia from invading Ukraine, but Moscow is looking for concessions from NATO. From Geneva, here's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landau. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Much more ahead. The Israeli government has begun rolling out a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine to people over 60 and healthcare workers. We'll speak to the Deputy Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Health. This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy. The Israeli government has begun rolling out a fourth dose of the COVID-19 vaccine to people over 60 and healthcare workers who received their last booster more than 4 months ago. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said the move would bring a new layer of defence for the country. It was one of the first to roll out its vaccine programme, but is now suffering from increasing rates of COVID-19 transmission due to the Omicron variant. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Asher Salman, the Deputy Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Health. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Why have you felt the need to roll out this fourth round of vaccines? OK, Dr. Asher Salman, Deputy Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Health, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think I found a dinosaur. Those were the words of Joe Davis, who works at Rutland Water Nature Reserve on finding the fossilised remains of a 10-metre-long sea creature that lived 250 million years ago. The marine reptile, or sea dragon, is longer than a double-decker bus and is the largest and most complete skeleton of its kind ever found in the UK. Jonah Fisher reports. Amazing. Now, The Power of the Dog has become the second film directed by a woman to win Best Drama at the Golden Globes. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story was the other big winner. A scaled-back private ceremony has replaced the usual red carpet event in response to heavy criticism last year after it emerged that the voting panel of around 100 people had no black members. Well, here are some of the winners. As we mentioned, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story remake won prize for Best Musical or Comedy and 2 other awards, including Best Actress for Rachel Ziegler. The Netflix-produced western The Power of the Dog also took 3 awards, including Best Director for Jane Campion. Other acting honours went to Will Smith for playing the father of the tennis stars Venus and Serena Williams in the film King Richard. Nicole Kidman took an award for her roles in the US TV legend Lucille Ball in Being the Ricardos. And MJ Rodriguez won Best TV Actress for her work on the series Pose. She's the first transgender actress to win a Golden Globe. Just let me remind you of our top story this hour. We've just had that news conference by Novak Djokovic's family, defiant in their tone, saying that he was really campaigning for freedom of expression, that they were obviously delighted that he was out, and he has tweeted himself a picture of him training already on the tennis court, saying that he's still hoping to play in the Australian Open and win the tournament. We are back in a few minutes with all the very latest. Thanks for joining us. This is BBC News. Hello, this is Impact. I'm Geeta, Guru-Murthy. Novak Djokovic says he's pleased and grateful after a judge overturns his visa cancellation. His supporters celebrate in Melbourne, but it's still possible he could be prevented from defending his Australian Open title. It's a row which left a tennis star in an unfamiliar court. We'll have the very latest. Also ahead, Burma's ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi is jailed for another 4 years as the military tries to strengthen its grip following last year's coup. New York is in shock after 19 people, including 9 children, are killed in an apartment block fire in the Bronx. When superpowers come face to face, we'll explain why Ukraine has become a potential flashpoint at talks between Russia and the US. That's all coming up on Impact. Welcome to the programme. Novak Djokovic has won his court battle to stay in Australia and defend his Grand Slam title, but ministers have threatened that they might exercise powers to cancel his visa anyway. We are waiting, of course, to hear what the Australian government does do, because the rules still seem to say at a federal level that without vaccination you are not allowed to enter Australia. But this story, of course, is far from over. Let's move on. And a court in military-ruled Myanmar has sentenced detained former leader Aung San Suu Kyi to another 4 years in jail. Nobel laureate Suu Kyi, who is 76, was on trial for nearly a dozen cases that carry combined maximum sentences of more than 100 years in prison. Ms Suu Kyi, ousted in a military coup almost a year ago, was found guilty of illegally importing and possessing walkie-talkies. She denies all the charges. Our correspondent Jonathan Head has been following the case from Thailand. He gave us his assessment of events. Jonathan Head there. At least 19 people, including 9 children, have died after a fire in a New York apartment building. Another 32 people were sent to hospital with life-threatening injuries. The fire, which began on the 19th floor of a residential building in the Bronx, is thought to have been caused by a portable electric heater. Our correspondent Neda Tawfik has more. Do stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, the president of Kazakhstan says the unrest in his country was caused by terrorists who were planning a coup, with around 8,000 people detained. This is Impact on BBC World News. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. The world experienced its 5th hottest year ever as average global temperatures continue to rise. That's according to a new report by the Copernicus, the EU's climate change monitoring service. Well, the report's authors say the past 7 years have been the warmest in recorded history by a clear margin. Justin Rolat reports. Kazakhstan's president says last week's unrest was caused by an attempted coup. It's as the Russian President Vladimir Putin says militants trained in foreign terrorist camps were behind the violence that erupted in the country in recent days. President Putin added troops in Kazakhstan were legitimate and would stay until Kazakhstan's President Tokayev thought they were needed. But he drew a distinction between those initially involved in the gas price protest and those involved in the violence in cities like Almaty. Today, a day of mourning will be observed in Kazakhstan. More than 150 people were killed during last week's unrest. Our correspondent Abdul Abdurasulov sent this report from Almaty on the violence of the last week. I think I found a dinosaur. Those were the words of Joe Davis, who works at Rutland Water Nature Reserve on finding the fossilised remains of a 10-metre-long sea creature that lived 250 million years ago. Well, the marine reptile, or sea dragon, is longer than a double-decker bus and is the largest and most complete skeleton of its kind ever found in the UK. Jonah Fisher reports. We don't think it's monstrous. We think it's marvellous. My dinosaur-obsessed son, anyway, would be very excited to see that whenever it goes up on display. I'm on Twitter at Geeta Guru-Murthy. See you very soon. Bye-bye. Hello, this is Impact. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy. Novak Djokovic says he's pleased and grateful after a judge overturns his visa cancellation. His supporters celebrate in Melbourne, but the government is still deciding whether to deport him and stop him defending his Australian Open title.
He always fought for justice. He's done nothing wrong. He hasn't broken any of their laws.
But that's not how everyone sees it. This is a row which has left a tennis star in an unfamiliar court. We'll have the very latest, also ahead. New York is in shock after 19 people, including 9 children, are killed in an apartment block fire in the Bronx. That's all coming up for you here on Impact. Welcome to the programme. Novak Djokovic has won his court battle to stay in Australia and defend his Grand Slam title, but ministers have threatened they might exercise their powers to cancel his visa anyway. Jane McGuinness there, sports journalist from Melbourne, Australia. India's most populous bellwether state, Uttar Pradesh, with a bigger population than Russia, is set to go to the polls in the next couple of months. However, a unique problem seems to be turning into a bit of an election issue. Stray cows are eating up farmers' crops and in some instances even a bit of a threat to humans. Well, BBC's Nitin Srivastava reports from rural Uttar Pradesh in northern India. This is Impact on BBC World News. The world experienced its 5th hottest year ever as average global temperatures continue to rise. That's according to a new report by the Copernicus, the EU Climate Change Monitoring Service. Well, the report's authors say the past 7 years have been the warmest in recorded history by a clear margin. Justin Rowlatt reports. I think I found a dinosaur. Those were the words of Joe Davis, who works at a water nature reserve in Rutland, when he found the fossilised remains of a 10-metre-long sea creature that lived 250 million years ago. The marine reptile, or sea dragon, is longer than a double-decker bus and is the largest, most complete skeleton of its kind ever found in the UK. Jenna Fisher reports. Much more on all our news online, and I'm on Twitter at Geeta Guru-Murthy. I'm back with the headlines. I'm back again with a full programme for you tomorrow. See you then. Thanks for watching.
Hello there. There's a lot of quiet weather across much of Western Europe.